In a city where churches rise on every corner and faith burns louder than the generators, one pastor's hunger for success will awaken something far darker than doubt. Hello, my dear friends, and welcome once again to Tales by Larenzi. This is the home of inspiring life stories, stories that teach, warn, heal, and guide us in the journey of life, love, family, and relationships. If you are new here, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Your support means the world to me and helps us reach even more people who need these lessons of life. The city of Lagos never slept. Even on Sunday mornings, the streets hummed with life, hawkers shouting, generators rumbling, the distant blare of car horns weaving through the humid air. But inside the small rented hall on Baker Street, the sound was different, thinner. 12 voices lifted in worship, their song barely reaching the water-stained ceiling. The keyboard was off-key, the drum was a single conga, and the offering basket, when it was passed, collected more coins than bills. Pastor David stood at the wooden pulpit, Bible open to Psalm 27, his voice steady and warm despite everything. He was 32 years old, handsome in an unassuming way, clean-shaven, soft-spoken, with eyes that crinkled when he smiled. The kind of man who listened more than he spoke. The kind of pastor who remembered your name, your mother's surgery, your child's birthday. "Church," he said softly, his voice carrying a gentle authority. "God sees the heart, not the numbers, not the buildings, the heart." A few scattered amens floated back to him. Mrs. Okoye in the second row nodded enthusiastically, her baby asleep on her shoulder. Brother Timothy, the keyboardist, smiled tiredly from behind his instrument. Ruth, David's wife, sat in the front row, her hands folded in prayer, her eyes closed. But Pastor David's gaze drifted, just for a moment, to the window. Outside, across the street, another church was ending its service. Destiny Arena Ministries. Hundreds of people poured out of the massive glass doors, laughing, taking selfies, holding branded coffee cups with the church's logo stamped in gold. Security guards directed traffic. A camera crew packed up equipment. And standing at the entrance, waving like a celebrity, was Pastor Kingsley Okonkwo. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a cream designer suit that probably cost more than David's entire wardrobe. David looked away quickly, but the knot in his stomach tightened. After the service, Ruth helped him stack the plastic chairs in silence. She was 28 with a quiet beauty, the kind that deepened when she smiled. But lately she smiled less. "David," she said softly, not looking at him, "it's going to be okay." He nodded. "I know." But they both knew he didn't believe it. She straightened, brushing dust from her dress. 12 people, David. That's still 12 people whose lives you're touching. "We started with 15, he said quietly. 3 years ago. Ruth reached for his hand. "Moses started with 0. He smiled, the kind of smile that broke her heart because it didn't reach his eyes. "Moses had a burning bush," he said. "I have a rented hall and a landlord who calls me every week." She kissed his forehead. "God is still working." David pulled her close, resting his chin on her head. But inside, something was shifting. A small voice, quiet at first, whispered in the back of his mind, "How long will you wait?" That evening, just as David was locking up, a car pulled up outside. A brand new black Range Rover, gleaming under the streetlights, with tinted windows and custom rims. The door opened. Pastor Kingsley stepped out, adjusting his gold Rolex, flashing that $1,000,000 smile. "David, my brother." His voice boomed across the empty street, confident and warm, the kind of voice that filled stadiums. David forced a smile. "Kingsley, what brings you here? Can't a brother check on a brother?" Kingsley spread his arms wide and pulled David into a tight embrace. Too tight, too long, smelling of expensive cologne. They walked into the small church office, barely more than a storage room with a desk and 2 chairs. Kingsley sat down heavily, legs spread wide, radiating the kind of ease that only comes with success. "So," Kingsley said, glancing around the cramped space, "how's ministry?" "It's growing," David lied. Kingsley smiled, not unkindly but knowingly. He leaned back, fingers laced over his stomach. "David, let me be honest with you. You're anointed. I've always said that. You have a gift, but—" He paused. David's chest tightened. "But what?" "But anointing alone doesn't fill seats, my brother. There are levels to this thing, levels most pastors never reach because they're afraid to go deeper." David frowned. "Deeper? What do you mean?" Kingsley leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "There are helpers, David, spiritual helpers, men who understand the ancient ways, the ways that unlock doors prayer alone cannot open." David's stomach twisted. "What kind of helpers?" Kingsley waved a hand dismissively. "I'm not talking about demons or evil. I'm talking about alignment. There are forces older than our doctrine, older than our denominations, forces that recognize greatness and accelerate destiny. Kingsley, listen." Kingsley's eyes locked onto his, serious now. "You think I got here by praying 3 hours a day? You think I built a 10,000-member church by fasting?" David said nothing. "I did what was necessary," Kingsley continued. "I aligned myself. I made investments. And now look." He spread his arms, gesturing to an invisible empire. "Look at what God has done." "God?" David's voice was tight. "Or something else?" Kingsley stood abruptly, adjusting his watch. "You can call it whatever you want, David. But the results speak for themselves." He moved toward the door, then paused, glancing back over his shoulder. "You're a good man, David. Too good, maybe. But good men finish last in this city. Think about it." And he left. The room suddenly felt colder. David sat alone in the dim light, staring at the cracked walls. Kingsley's words echoed in his mind like a drumbeat. Good men finish last. Good men finish last. 2 weeks later, the landlord came. Mr. Ibrahim was a short, stocky man with a permanent scowl and zero patience for mercy. He stood in the doorway of the hall, arms folded, his voice sharp. "Pastor David, we need to talk." David's heart sank. "Mr. Ibrahim, 3 months, Pastor, 3 months of promises. I've been patient. But this is business." "I know. I'll have it by next week." Mr. Ibrahim's voice was final. "Next week, or I'm locking this place and renting it to someone who can pay." He turned and walked away, not waiting for a response. David stood frozen in the doorway, shame burning through him like acid. That night, Ruth sat at their small kitchen table, her jewelry box open in front of her. Gold earrings her mother had given her on her wedding day. A bracelet David had bought her on their first anniversary. A necklace passed down from her grandmother. She stared at them for a long moment, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. Then she closed the box, stood, and walked to the bedroom. "David," she said quietly, "I'm selling them tomorrow." He looked up from where he sat on the edge of the bed, head in his hands. "Ruth, no. I can't let you. We don't have a choice." Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled. "It's either this or we lose the church." David's throat closed. She knelt in front of him, taking his face in her hands. "We'll be okay. God will provide." But even she didn't sound convinced anymore. Sunday came. 4 people showed up. 4. Ruth, Mrs. Okoye and her baby, Brother Timothy, and old Mama Ngozi, who came every week no matter what. David stood at the pulpit, staring out at the rows of empty plastic chairs. His voice cracked halfway through the sermon. He tried to continue, but the words caught in his throat, and he had to stop, gripping the edges of the pulpit to steady himself. Mrs. Okoye looked away, embarrassed for him. Mama Ngozi whispered a prayer under her breath. Ruth's eyes filled with tears. After the service, Jonathan, a member who had been there from the very beginning, approached him slowly, reluctantly. Jonathan was a good man, a mechanic, honest, hard-working. "Pastor David," he began carefully, his voice low, "I need to talk to you." David nodded, bracing himself. Jonathan scratched the back of his neck, avoiding eye contact. "I've been praying about this, and I don't think I can keep coming." David felt his chest cave in. "It's not you," Jonathan continued quickly. "You're a good man, a godly man, but maybe this isn't your calling. Maybe God has another plan for you." The words hit like a punch. "I'm saying this because I care," Jonathan added, squeezing David's shoulder. "Sometimes we have to be honest about when something isn't working." David watched him walk away, his vision blurring. Then he sat down in the front row, alone, and wept. That's when he heard the small voice. "Pastor?" David looked up, quickly wiping his face. Little Emmanuel stood in the aisle, his choir robe hanging off his small frame like a blanket. He was 7 years old, gap-toothed, with bright, curious eyes. "Emmanuel, what are you still doing here?" The boy climbed onto the chair beside him, swinging his legs. "My daddy was talking to Mama outside. I came to check on you." David tried to smile. "I'm okay, Emmanuel." "You don't look okay." Out of the mouths of babes, Emmanuel tilted his head, studying him seriously. "My daddy says you're the best pastor in Lagos. He says God hears you, even when people don't come." David's throat tightened painfully. The boy reached over and hugged him, small arms wrapping around David's neck. "Don't be sad, Pastor. Jesus loves you." David hugged him back, tightly, too tightly, and for a brief, terrible moment, a dark thought flickered through his mind. What if? He pushed it away quickly, horrified. But the seed had been planted. Kingsley's text came at 11:47 p.m. David was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. Ruth was curled beside him, her breathing soft and steady. His phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. Kingsley. Pastor's prayer retreat tomorrow night. Serious ministers only. Come alone. Address attached. David stared at the message. Every instinct screamed at him not to go, but the weight pressing down on his chest, the shame, the failure, the crushing sense of invisibility, was unbearable. He typed back, "What kind of retreat?" The reply came instantly. "Kingsley, the kind that changes everything." The next night, David told Ruth he was meeting with some pastors to pray. It wasn't entirely a lie. The address led him to the east side of the city, to a luxury apartment complex with a marble lobby and a doorman in a crisp uniform. Top floor. David's hands were sweating as he knocked. The door opened slowly. Inside, the apartment was dimly lit. Candles burned low on the floor, casting flickering shadows on the walls. The air was thick with incense, sweet and cloying, making his head swim. 6 men sat in a circle on the floor, all of them dressed in white robes. Their faces were expressionless, eyes half closed, as if in meditation. No one spoke. No one acknowledged David's presence. Then, from the back room, he entered. The man in white ashes, tall and lean, moving with an eerie grace. His skin was pale, unnaturally so, and dusted with white ash, like he'd just stepped out of a crematorium. His eyes were calm, too calm, and his smile, kind, but wrong. "Pastor David," he said softly, his voice like silk over gravel. "Welcome." David's throat went dry. I think I made a mistake. I should..." "Sit," It wasn't a command, but David's legs moved on their own, and he found himself sitting in the circle. The man in white ashes sat across from him, folding his legs gracefully. "You are tired," he said, his voice gentle. "Tired of praying. Tired of waiting. Tired of being invisible." David's pulse hammered. "How do you—" "I know many things, Pastor. I know you wake at 4 a.m. to pray. I know you fast twice a week. I know you love God with all your heart." The man leaned forward slightly, his eyes locking onto David's. "And I know God has not answered." The words hit like a slap. "That's not—" David started, but his voice faltered. "Because it was true." "You've done everything right," the man continued, his voice soothing, almost hypnotic. "But righteousness alone does not build empires, Pastor. Every great altar must be fed." David's stomach twisted. "Fed? What do you mean?" The man smiled. "Power requires sacrifice. Influence requires offering. If you want a voice that cannot be ignored, you must give something pure." "I don't understand," David whispered, though part of him did. The man gestured to one of the robed figures who produced a small wooden box. Inside were two items, a knife and a photograph. The man lifted the knife first. "Option 1. You sacrifice something from your own body, a finger, a toe, your blood. This grants you short success, limited power. Your church will grow for a season, then plateau." He set the knife down and lifted the photograph. It was a picture of a child, not just any child. Emmanuel. David's blood ran cold. "Option 2, the man said softly. You sacrifice an innocent life. Someone who trusts you, someone pure. This grants you lasting influence, honor, legacy, a voice that will echo for generations." David shot to his feet, his chair clattering backward. "You're insane. I'm leaving." No one moved to stop him. But as he reached the door, the man's voice drifted after him, soft as smoke, cold as death. "Every altar must be fed, Pastor David. The only question is, when will you be hungry enough?" David stumbled out of the building, gasping for air. His hands shook as he unlocked his car. He drove home in silence, his mind reeling. Sacrifice an innocent life, someone who trusts you. He thought of Emmanuel's gap-toothed smile, his small arms wrapping around David's neck. "Don't be sad, Pastor. Jesus loves you." David pulled over and vomited on the side of the road. 3 days later, everything collapsed. Mr. Ibrahim arrived with a padlock and chain. He didn't say a word, just locked the church doors and walked away. David stood on the sidewalk, staring at the locked building, his vision swimming. A small crowd had gathered, former members, neighbors, passers-by. They whispered, pointed. One woman shook her head sadly. "I told you that church wouldn't last." Another laughed. "These pastors nowadays, all talk, no power." Ruth stood beside him, silent, tears streaming down her face. David wanted to scream, wanted to defend himself, but he had no words left. That night he sat alone in their tiny living room, staring at his phone. Social media was brutal. A video of the locked church had gone viral. Comments flooded in. "Failed pastor. God is not mocked. Guess he wasn't called. Should have gotten a real job." Meanwhile, Pastor Kingsley's page was exploding with success. New post, 20,000 members and counting. To God be the glory. The photo showed Kingsley standing in front of a massive congregation, arms raised, face glowing. 10,000 likes, 3,000 comments. David's hands trembled as he scrolled. How? How did Kingsley do it? And then he remembered. I did what was necessary. I made investments. David opened his messages, stared at Kingsley's last text. His thumb hovered over the screen. And then he typed, "I'm ready." The response came within seconds. Kingsley, "Good. Tomorrow night. Same place. Bring nothing." David set the phone down. Ruth was asleep in the bedroom. He walked to the window, staring out at the dark city. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang, and Pastor David made his choice. The next afternoon, David called Jonathan. "Brother Jonathan," he said, keeping his voice steady, "I need a favor." "Anything, Pastor." "I'm cleaning out the old church tomorrow, just one last time before I hand over the keys. Could Emmanuel help me? I know he loves the place." Jonathan hesitated. "Tomorrow. I have work. Just for a few hours. I'll bring him home before dark. It would mean a lot to him. And to me." Silence. Then, "All right, Pastor. Emmanuel will be happy to help." David's heart pounded. "Thank you." The next day, Emmanuel skipped beside David as they walked to the locked church. He wore his choir robe, too big for him, dragging on the ground, and carried a small broom like a sword. "Pastor, are we really going to clean?" David unlocked the padlock with shaking hands. "Yes, Emmanuel." One last time. Inside, the hall was dim and dusty. Sunlight filtered through the dirty windows, casting long shadows. Emmanuel hummed a worship song as he swept the floor, his little voice echoing in the empty space. David stood at the pulpit, staring down at the wooden floorboards. Beneath them was dirt, and soon, something else. Midnight came. David had sent Emmanuel home hours ago, promising to finish the cleaning himself. But now, alone in the dark, he stood at the pulpit again, and he wasn't alone. The door creaked open. 6 figures in white robes entered silently, moving like shadows. The man in white ashes came last, carrying a small wooden box. He set it down on the altar. Inside, a knife, a candle, and a vial of oil. "You called us," the man said softly. "You are ready." David's voice was barely a whisper. I can't. You can. You must. The altar hungers, Pastor, and you hunger for more." David closed his eyes. Tears streamed down his face. "Bring the boy," the man commanded. David drove to Jonathan's house. It was 1 a.m. He knocked softly. Jonathan answered, groggy and confused. "Pastor." "What's wrong?" "I'm sorry," David said, his voice hollow. "I forgot my tools at the church." "Could Emmanuel come help me carry them?" "Just for 10 minutes." Jonathan frowned. "It's the middle of the night. Please." Something in David's eyes made Jonathan hesitate, but Emmanuel appeared behind him, rubbing his eyes, smiling. "I'll go, Daddy." "Pastor needs me." Jonathan sighed. 10 minutes. 10 minutes, David echoed. Emmanuel fell asleep in the car on the way to the church. David carried him inside, the boy's head resting on his shoulder. The robed figures stood waiting. The man in white ashes smiled. "Lay him on the altar." David's hands trembled violently as he placed Emmanuel on the wooden pulpit. The boy stirred. "Pastor." "Shh," David whispered, tears pouring down his face. "It's okay. Go back to sleep." Emmanuel's eyes fluttered closed. The man handed David the knife. "Now," he whispered, "feed the altar." David's entire body shook. I can't. But then he thought of the empty chairs, the locked doors, the mocking voices, Kingsley's success, his own failure, and he heard his own voice, distant and broken. "I just want to matter." David raised the knife. Emmanuel's eyes opened. "Pastor?" David looked down at him, this innocent child who trusted him, who loved him, who believed in him, and he whispered, "I'm so sorry." What happened next is not for words. The silence that followed was unbearable, thick and suffocating, like the air itself had died. The robed figures moved quickly, efficiently. They dug beneath the pulpit. They placed the small body inside. They covered the earth. They rebuilt the altar on top. And through it all, David sat in the corner, staring at his blood-stained hands, his mind shattered. The man in white ashes knelt beside him, placing a cold hand on his shoulder. "It is done," he whispered. "Now, Pastor David, you will never be forgotten." Within 2 weeks, everything changed. Pastor David's sermons began appearing on social media, short clips, powerful moments, spreading like wildfire. One video went viral. David preaching with tears streaming down his face, his voice breaking with raw emotion. "God sees you," he cried, "even when no one else does." 10 million views, 500,000 shares. Comments poured in. "This pastor is anointed." I felt the Holy Spirit through the screen. "Where is this church?" "I need to visit." Miracles started happening. A woman with a tumor, healed. A man in a wheelchair, walked. A barren couple, pregnant after one prayer. The testimonies spread, and the people came. Hundreds at first, then thousands. Within a month, a wealthy businessman named Chief Adeyemi approached David after service. "Pastor," he said, gripping David's hand firmly, "God has spoken to me. I'm donating land and funding for a new cathedral, 10,000 seating capacity." David stared at him, numb. I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Chief Adeyemi smiled. "This is your season." The new cathedral was completed in record time. Destiny Fire Ministries, glass walls, LED screens, state-of-the-art sound system. The opening service drew 15,000 people. News cameras lined the back. Governor's wife sat in the VIP section, and Pastor David stood on the massive stage, microphone in hand, looking out at the sea of faces. Ruth sat in the front row, beaming. She squeezed his hand before he went up. "I told you God would come through." David smiled, but inside he felt nothing. He avoided children now. When babies were brought forward for dedication, he quickly handed them to the assistant pastors. "Let the elders handle it," he'd say, his voice tight. Parents thought he was being humble. Only David knew the truth. He couldn't look at them, couldn't touch them, because every time he did, he saw Emmanuel's face. At night, Ruth would curl up beside him, happy and exhausted from the day's ministry. "Can you believe this, David? All those years of struggle, and now look, God is so faithful." David stared at the ceiling. "Yeah," he whispered, "faithful." But he didn't sleep anymore, because when he closed his eyes, he heard it. Footsteps, small footsteps, padding down the hallway, stopping outside his bedroom door. And then, nothing. Just silence. Waiting. Sister Grace, Emmanuel's mother, started having nightmares 3 weeks after her son's disappearance. The police had searched, questioned, but found nothing. Emmanuel had simply vanished. Jonathan was a broken man, barely able to work, spending his nights walking the streets calling his son's name. And Grace dreamed. In the dreams, Emmanuel stood in a dark room, dirt covering his choir robe. He didn't speak, just stared at her, and pointed down, down, down. She would wake up, gasping, drenched in sweat. One night, she shook Jonathan awake. "I need to go to the church." "What church?" "Pastor David's church, the old one." "Grace, it's locked, abandoned." "I need to go." She went the next morning, stood outside the padlocked doors, staring. Something pulled her there, something cold and urgent. She pressed her hand against the door, and heard it. Faint, a child's voice. "Mama!" She gasped, stumbling backward. The street was empty, no children anywhere. But she had heard it. She was sure. Meanwhile, at the new cathedral, strange things began happening during services. During worship, the sound system would crackle just for a moment, and people swore they heard a child crying. The tech team checked everything. "Equipment's fine, Pastor." But it kept happening. One Sunday, a young mother brought her 6-month-old baby for dedication. The moment she stepped into the sanctuary, the baby began screaming, high-pitched, terror-filled shrieks. Nothing would calm him. The mother tried everything, rocking, singing, nursing, but the baby thrashed and screamed, eyes wide with fear, staring at the altar. She finally left, embarrassed and shaken. Later, she told a friend, it was like he saw something. Other babies started reacting the same way. Parents began whispering, maybe it's the air conditioning. Maybe it's too loud. But the ushers knew. Late one night, after everyone had left, 2 ushers were cleaning the sanctuary, Brother Felix and Sister Amara. They heard it clearly, a child's voice, soft and sad, coming from beneath the altar. Help me, help me, help me. They froze. Did you hear that? Felix whispered. Amara nodded, her face pale. They ran, and never spoke of it again. Pastor David began seeing him everywhere. At first it was just flashes, a small figure in the corner of his eye, gone when he turned, a shadow moving across the stage during prayer. But then it became clearer. One evening David was alone in his office, preparing Sunday's sermon. He glanced up at the mirror on the wall. Emmanuel stood behind him, covered in dirt, choir robe torn, eyes hollow. David spun around. Nothing. He looked back at the mirror. Emmanuel was still there, watching. David's heart slammed against his ribs. You're not real, he whispered. The reflection smiled sadly, and then was gone. During a Wednesday night service, David was mid-sermon when he saw him again. Emmanuel, sitting in the 3rd row, surrounded by hundreds of people, but no one seemed to notice him. The boy's lips moved silently. Pastor, I trusted you. David stopped speaking. The congregation stared, confused. Pastor, someone called out. Are you okay? David blinked. Emmanuel was gone. He forced a smile. Yes, sorry. Let's continue. But his hands trembled on the pulpit. Ruth noticed. David, you've been different lately. Distant. They were lying in bed, the lights off, the city glowing beyond their window. I'm fine, he said automatically. You don't pray anymore. You barely eat. And sometimes you look terrified. He said nothing. She turned to face him. Talk to me. Please. He wanted to. God, how he wanted to. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, he kissed her forehead. Just stress. The ministry is growing so fast. She didn't believe him, but she stopped asking. One night, David woke at 3 a.m. The room was freezing. His breath misted in the air. He sat up slowly, his heart pounding, and saw him, Emmanuel, standing at the foot of the bed. Not a shadow, not a reflection. Really there. David couldn't breathe, couldn't move. The boy tilted his head, his voice a whisper. Why, Pastor? I'm sorry, David choked out, tears streaming. I'm so sorry. You said Jesus loved me. He does. Then why did you kill me? David's mouth opened, but no sound came. Emmanuel stepped closer, closer, until he was inches from David's face. His eyes, once bright and full of life, were now empty pits. The altar is hungry again, Pastor. And next time, it will take someone you love, David screamed. He woke up gasping, drenched in sweat. Ruth was shaking him. David! David, wake up! He stared around wildly. No Emmanuel, just Ruth, terrified and confused. You were screaming, she whispered. David couldn't stop shaking. I need help, he finally said, his voice broken. Ruth, I need help. The truth has been buried, but not forgotten. The confession shook a nation. But some altars don't rest even after blood. The curse has only just begun. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because in part 2, the blood speaks again.